Hello and welcome to the VB Toolbox. In this tutorial I'm going to be showing you how to upload images into a Microsoft SQL Server Database. Generally it's a best practice, I think, to just store the image path as text in the database as opposed to actually storing the image data itself. The image data is much larger than standard database data, and it can grow your database very rapidly. However, there are certain applications, document control and whatnot, that would necessitate storing the image to your database. So I'm just going to show you how to create a little application, something like this. And what I have here is a user manager form, and I have two tables in my database, one for the user information and one for the associated image data. It's best to store your image data in a separate table, indexing by username or some other piece of information that can relate the two tables. This is for to improve the indexing and performance of your database when you're actually using this procedure. So when you're done, I hope to have this little application or something similar to it in which we can browse for an image on our hard drive and select that from your disk, add a user. In this case I'll do Alex, and then you can enter a password, whatever you want, email address or website, and that's up to you. And then we'll be able to save the image to the database along with the user information. This is going to two separate tables when I save, and then we'll be able to query that data and retrieve the image data from the database. So what I've done is created a little dynamic query in a combo box here, and we should be able to see the record we just added. There's Alex, and this image here, as opposed to the one on this form, is being drawn from the database. So it actually uploaded and retrieved it successfully. So I'm going to kind of be rushing through here. It's a lot of information to cover, and if you're just here for the instant gratification, I will attach the project source code in the description. So if you want to just download that and look at it just to get an idea of what I'm doing, that's absolutely fine. Otherwise, you can follow along, and I really hope you enjoy it. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Actually, one more thing before we begin. I will be walking you through actually creating a small sample database to work with in this tutorial. This tutorial does assume that you have a database, Microsoft SQL Server Database, installed that is accessible by you, and you'll need administrative permissions to that database to be able to actually create a database and the tables within that. So it's kind of important. I just want you to keep that in mind. It's really difficult for me to assist you in troubleshooting SQL Server performance issues and connectivity problems and things like that. I do my best to help out, but some things are just kind of beyond my reach here. So let's go ahead and jump into our project. First thing we need to do is actually create a project, so I'm going to select a new project to create the project template. And from here we will give our application a name, so I'm going to just call it DB Images. You can call yours whatever you like, and we want to make sure that Windows Forms application is selected. Okay. Hopefully that'll create a project template for us to begin working with. And so, wow, where to begin? Okay, first thing I'm going to do, click on my form header here, and I'm going to go to my properties dialog, and I'm just going to change the text down here to, so, I don't know, database images. Something like that. Okay, now Let me get this management studio out of my way here. Sorry. Actually, let's go ahead and just get the database set up. Sorry, I'm a little kind of tired here, trying to decide what I want to do first. So I'm going to go ahead and go down to security, and we're going to create a new login. You can right click on your security object there, and I'm going to just use SQL Server authentication, and I'm just going to give myself a login called dbguy. And whoops, that was not the login name. dbguy. Okay. And password will just be password 1. And this is the information that we will actually supply in our SQL connection string in Visual Basic. So I'm just going to turn off enforce password policy. Really just going to keep this simple, leave the defaults, and hit OK. And when we're done, we should have a new user, and there is dbguy. After that, we will go ahead and create a database. And right click and select new database. And the database name is going to be DB Images. And the owner is going to be dbguy. So hit browse, find dbguy that you created, and click OK. That will make him the owner and administrator of this database, so our application will have full permissions to this particular database. You can set some of the other options if you're really into it. I'm going to just kind of, yeah, it's really not necessary. Just going to kind of buzz through this, keep the rest of the defaults here, and hit OK, for the sake of time. And now that we have our new database, we can go and to the tables in the tree there. We want to right click and create a new table. And first column name, I'm going to use ID. This is just going to be the primary key and identity column. You can use an integer or a big int, doesn't matter. I think that will just affect the maximum number of rows that it can create. And one thing we want to do here is set this as an identity column. So we're going to go down in the column properties, find the identity specification, and set isIdentity to yes. Okay, once you do that, you can make that your primary key by right-clicking on the row and set primary key. Now we'll add a few other fields here, or columns. We'll say one will be username, and I'm just going to make this a varchar 30 characters long. Is probably long enough for most usernames. I don't want this to be able to be a null value, so I want to kind of force the user to supply a username. Again, in the interest of time, I'm not doing anything fancy on this database. Not going to be adding indexes to improve performance, or force these records to be unique as they should be in the real world. So keep that in mind. And I'm going to add a password column. Going to do a varchar of 30 on that as well. No nulls. And you can supply any other account information you want, maybe an email address. Varchar, what's it? I'll just leave that as 50, and that's okay to be null. I mean, if they don't want to supply an email address, whatever. Website, how about that? And this might be a varchar 255, because URLs can be pretty long. Again, this information is not entirely necessary. I'm just trying to kind of make it like my application was before that I showed you. So once you're done there, go ahead and save your table. And this table name is very important to remember, as our SQL queries on the Visual Basic side will reference these tables. So I'm just going to call this one users. And now we want to create our images table. I'm going to actually make it as kind of like a website or forum or something, and I'm going to make them as avatars. So I'm going to say right click on tables again, select new table, and I'm going to supply an ID for quick indexing and whatnot, and that will be, let's set that as a big int again. And once again we want to set that so it auto increments, and to do that you just, and one thing's important to remember, when you have an auto incrementing column, you don't need to specify that. In fact, you don't want to specify that in your database inserts and updates and things like that. So that's an automated record, and you just want to kind of leave it alone. So I'm going to go ahead and set that as the primary key again. Right click on that, and now we're going to, because we're creating a relational database, even though we're not really using the relationship in the real world, you certainly might be. So I'm going to relate it to our users table by username. So I want to supply a username to reference the image from. So I'm going to set that to the same format as our users field in the other one. Don't want nulls. And finally, avatar, and this one's the important one. The data type that we're going to use for our image data to store that binary data in the table is going to be image. Okay, there's an image, should be an image data type here, and that will accept that large binary object. I'm going to go ahead and just leave that as null. It doesn't matter. If the user doesn't want to specify an avatar, that's fine. I guess you just sort of think ahead. And I will save that table, and I'm going to call this one avatars. Okay. So once you're done here, you should have a fully functional database with no records in it. And you should be able to see your tables in the table structure here. Not sure why my little hourglass thing there is spinning. Okay. So with that, we should be ready to rock and roll with our application. I'm going to go ahead and jump back over to Visual Basic. Now, as I do in most of my tutorials, specifically database tutorials, I like to create what I call my SQL Control class or database control class. This just gives me a simple class for handling my queries and other SQL commands. So if you already have one of these from watching a previous tutorial, you can just copy and paste that code into your new class, or if you want to skip ahead, I will have shortcuts at the bottom in the description. So you can skip ahead, or if you haven't seen any of my other tutorials and do not have this class, you can follow along. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my Solution Explorer on the right here and right click on my project name, and I'm going to add a new class, and I'm going to call this class SQL Control. This is sort of just a nice little database control class. Kind of helps keep our main project clean from any of the database calls and all that fun stuff. So I'm going to add that, and we get a nice empty class structure here. So what we want to do is bring in a reference to the SQL Server client. Okay, this is important for connecting to our SQL Server database. So I'm going to say imports the system.data.SQL client namespace, and now we can create all of our SQL commands and all that fun stuff. So I'm going to say, okay, we're going to start out, we got to create a connection string, and we have to create our SQL command variable, our data set, our data adapter, and our parameters list. So we're going to start out with our database connection. I'm going to say private dbcon as a new SQL connection, and you can provide an override when you create your new sub for the class. I'm just going to go ahead and hard code in my connection string right here. just to keep things kind of fast. So I'm going to say server. There are numerous websites out there that show you the proper connection strings for various database types. Since I'm using SQL Server, I'm just going to buzz along here. I have to, you want to use your server and instance name for your database here. So I'm going to say my server, if you look in Management Studio, is wizards / and the instance is wizard box. So that's what I want to use for mine. Say wizards and wizard box. Okay, and the next part of the parameter will be we have to specify the database that we're connecting to. So in my case, it's going to be database equals images DB. Again, that's what we named it here in our server. Oh, I'm sorry, DB images. Whoops, I got that backwards. Alrighty. And next up, we want to provide our login credentials. In this case, user equals DB guy. That's the account we just created. And we have to supply a password. You can use pwd equals and your password. My password is password1. Pretty simple. Okay, now some of you may be using trusted connections, so if you are, you can just omit the username and password and set the trusted connection equals true on that. And I think that's trusted _ connection. I have to verify that. Again, there's lots of information out there, easily accessible through a quick internet search. Next up, I'm going to use private db cmd for my database command. So as SQL command. Okay, I'm not creating a new instance of that in this case because each time we run a query or a command, we will create a new one of these. Alright, so now we need somewhere to store our database data and manage that. So this will be our DB data management. I'm going to do public, and the reason I'm using public on this one is because I want to be able to access this freely from my main form. So any of these that are set to private will not be accessible by your main form, only within the class. So I'm going to say DB DA as SQL data adapter. Alright, and after we have our data adapter, we also want a data set to store our data in with each query. So public db ds as data set. Alright, and now we're going to set up our query parameters. These are very important for maintaining data integrity, preventing SQL injection attacks. I highly recommend using them. They're not a requirement, but you should definitely get used to using them. Very important. So I'm going to set this as a public params as new list. We're just going to create our own little collection here of SQL parameters. So of SQL parameter. Okay. And what we'll do is we'll load up those parameters and force them through our queries and commands, and then we will clear this list out when we're done using it each time. That'll make a little more sense here in the future. And if you want some query statistics, I like to set this up. Query statistics. First one will be public record count, and this really only works if you're populating your data set, actually running a query. This does not tend to capture anything from like how many records were updated in an update command, or how many records were deleted when you ran a delete command. If you want to do that, you might want to use a different technique, maybe this execute non-query, but I haven't quite got there yet. kind of explain that later. I do want to capture my record counts, and public, this one's a little more important, exception as string. I use the exception a lot. Rather than popping up a message box that stalls your application or anything like that, I like to just capture my errors quietly to this exception and then check it later on to make sure that I got some data back from my query and didn't get an error when I tried running my queries or commands. So if you wanted to, well, one thing we want, an initialization sub here essentially. I'm going to say public sub new. And I'm just going to leave this one blank, and what'll happen is if I just call this blank one, it's automatically going to load up these values as they are. That includes this connection string. If you want to be able to override that connection string, maybe connect to multiple databases for some reason or another, it's completely up to you. It's pretty easy. You could say allow connection string override. And what we could do is create another public sub new with some parameters, at least one parameter for the connection string. That will just be a string. And that'll allow you to specify a brand new database connection that will basically wipe this one out with new values, including a new connection string. So we'll just say dbcon equals new connection, SQL connection with the supplied connection string. Okay, pretty easy. All right, now here's kind of the meat and potatoes of this class. This is going to be the execute query sub. And here I'm going to say execute query sub. Nice to keep notes so you know what's doing what. So I'm going to do a public sub, and I'm going to call it exec query. And this is where all the action is going to happen. The way that I set this up is so you don't have to individually call the execute query command or the execute non-query command for deletes, versus the selects, inserts, all that. This does it all. So it's kind of nice that way. It does have some limits to its functionality, but for the most part it's kind of a one-stop shop. I like it. So query as string will be our only parameter for this sub. So what we'll do is we'll pass in a query, it will run through the code, execute the query or command, and then it will be done. So first thing I want to do is reset the record count and the exception. Basically, reset query stats. And this is pretty simple. Just say record count equals 0. So each time we run a query, it wipes everything out in this class essentially and refreshes it. It's kind of nice. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Just going to set that to an empty string. And next up, we want to use a try catch here to capture any errors gracefully. It's a lot nicer than, if you make a mistake in your query, rather than crashing your application, it'll just quietly stuff it in this exception string, and you can reference that and find out what went wrong when you tried running your query. So I'll say try, hit enter, and it should generate that expression for you. And the first thing we need to do is open a connection to our database. So this will say dbcon dot open, piece of cake. Okay, now what we want to do is create our database command. So we'll say dbcmd equals a new SQL command. And what we want to do is pass our query into that along with our connection. So it knows which connection to execute our query against. All right. Next up, once our command has been generated, we want to add any parameters that we want to use to that command. So we'll say load params into the database command. And what I'll do here is a nice clean one-line lambda statement. And say params, that's our list up here. You want to add, or I'm going to say for each, sorry, sub, and this is the lambda. It creates an anonymous sub inside of here. So for each p, that's our parameter, in the parameters list, we'll say db cmd dot parameters dot add. So, oops, I want to add p. Okay. So I hope that's sort of self-explanatory there. What this for each does is it loops through this list, and if it finds any parameters in that list, it takes them from the list and then moves them over into this collection over here, the database command parameters. Okay, it's just a little shuffling. Now you could certainly add those parameters directly. I just like to do that as part of the class. Makes it a little easier in the future, as you'll see, a little less coding down the road. So the for each just loops through all those values. The sub grabs a parameter as its parameter and adds it into this list. Okay, so once we're done using that parameters list, we want to get rid of those parameters so they don't cause the next query to think that it has parameters that it doesn't. So we're just going to flush it out. So say clear param list. I'm going to say params dot clear. Very simple. All right, this is where we will execute the command and fill our data set if we're running a select. Okay, if we're running an insert, delete, or update, you're not going to get a data set as a result, because those don't actually return data from the database. When you run a select, an actual query, it will return data from the database, so we want a place to store that, and that will be our data set variable that we set up here. So first thing I'm going to do is initialize create a new instance of a data set. So I'm going to say db ds equals a new data set. All right, now it's primed and ready to go. So then what we can do is use the database adapter to execute our database command. So we'll say db da equals new SQL data adapter with the db cmd. And finally, we're just going to set record count equals, and then we're going to call the database adapter's fill method on the data set. So we'll say dbda.fill dbds. Okay? Does that make sense? Create a new data set, create a new database adapter with the query command, and then execute it. And this fill method on the database adapter returns an integer value, as you can see down there. Whoops. And that will actually represents the number of records returned to the data set. So that updates our record count. And once we're done there, we can capture any exceptions. If we have an error in our query, we want to know what it is. So we'll say exception equals exec query error. Okay. And environment. Actually, you don't have to do environment new line. I'm just going to keep this simple. Just going to say VB new line and ex dot toString, ex dot message. Sorry. And I spelled exception wrong. Alright, so we catch any errors. It goes into this exception here, and then we store that as the message. This will be our error message to this exception variable. Alright, now the last thing we need to do before we're done is make sure that our database is closed when we're done using it. Because I'm using offline mode instead of connected mode, we definitely want to tidy up our connection when we're done. So we'll say dbcon, if dbcon.state equals open, then dbcon.close. All right, so that's all there is to that. This is the bulk of make another message here, capture errors, and finally close connection when we're done. Okay, now I have one more little sub to add here, and that's a quick and easy means of adding new parameters to our database. It saves us a bit of coding in the future here, as we'll see later on down the road. So I'm going to say add param sub. And we'll say public sub add param name as a string and the value as a string. So essentially each parameter consists of a name and a value. We'll say dim new param as new SQL parameter. Oops, where'd you go? Oh, there you go. And we'll pipe in the name and the value. And then when we're done creating that parameter, we'll add it to our list. Params.add new param. Okay, so you see kind of how that goes. We supply a parameter name. It usually starts with like an @ sign or something. Just generally what I do in SQL Server variables. And the actual value of that parameter that we're going to pass into our database. And so we pipe those into this new parameter and then add it to our params list. Then when we execute our query, it's going to grab it out of here, stick it in our database command, and execute it. Okay, and that concludes the SQL Control class. So sorry that was kind of a lot to work through there. Again, if you didn't want to go through all that, you could grab the project source in the description, but hey, it's fun, right? We're learning. So I'm going to go ahead and save my project. That's always a wise idea. I've had VB crash on me a couple of times. And we're ready to begin working on our form. All right, so here we're going to be adding a bunch of controls to actually utilize our data, our avatar and whatnot that we upload into our database. So first thing I'm going to do is add a tab control to this. Let's see, where's my tab control? Get my all Windows forms here. Where are you? Okay, there you are. So we can add our drag that tab control onto your form, and that will create a couple of default tab pages for you, which we will alter here in a moment. I want to also add a group box here. It's just a simple way of grouping our data. Not going to get too fancy. With that group box selected, you can change the text property in your properties dialog. So here we could say account information. Alright, well, that's nice. If you want, you can anchor that. I'm just trying to rush along here. I'm going to add a couple of label controls. I'll just start with one here. And this one will be for the username. We'll kind of line them up here. Username should probably be one word. And you can just right click on that and copy, or Control C and Control V. Right click, paste. And this will be for our password. Changing the text property on that as well. Yellow. There it goes. Alright. And we also want text box. So I'm going to select my text box here, drop it on the form. You can use your arrow keys to adjust that if you want fine definition. So if you recall, when we're setting up our database, we have in our users and avatars tables a column called username and password. And each of these is set to a varchar of 30. So you don't, when you're inserting data into your database, you know, I'm not really using a lot of validation in this tutorial. So because we're not really validating our forms, if we want to just add some constraints to these text boxes, we can. In this case, what I will do is set the maximum length to 30 characters, and that will prohibit the user from overflowing that database column and throwing errors. So you can just set the max length property to 30 there. And I'm going to copy this field, Control C, come down here, Control V, and paste it. Same as we did before, just using keyboard shortcuts. And that should carry over its the max length property. Where are you? Yeah, so it's still 30. Something you generally want to do with a password field is make it so when the user types in it, rather than displaying, I'm going to go ahead and run this, you'll notice that it displays plain text characters there, so you kind of want to hide those. So what you can do is, with that field selected, go down to the use system password character property and set that to true, and then what you get is this nice little effect. Okay, so that hides the password from onlookers. Okay, now that we have these fields, I'm going to rename them so they're easier to call in our code and to identify. I'm going to call my text box for the username txt username, and for my password I'm going to call that one txt password. And if you want, you know, because we added and we set it so they can accept nulls, but you know, we tossed in a couple extra fields, the email and website. They're not necessary to specify, but we'll kind of want them maybe. So I'm going to just go ahead and copy my username field. Just remember, if you accidentally right click and copy the password field, when you go to type in this other one, it's going to carry over that password character, so don't accidentally make that little mistake. I'm going to put my email address down here and grab a label, copy that, paste it down here, and The reason I don't usually rename my labels is because, the only time I rename the controls is if I'm actually utilizing them in the code. So in this case, I won't be changing these labels here, so I'm not renaming them. Just leave it as label 1, label 2. Here I'm going to say email address, and I'm going to go ahead and make a copy of this since the URL for the website is similar. So you can select multiple controls, Control C and then Control V to paste, or right click and copy and paste. Again, totally up to you. And URLs tend to be a little bit longer, so I'm just going to squeeze that out there a bit for the website. And changing the text property to website. And here I want to change the name of this text box to txt email, and this one I will change to txt website. Alright, and finally I want to capture, if you actually want to be able to see, and this is completely unnecessary, but if you actually want to be able to see the path that you're picking your image for your database from, for your open file dialog, you can come down here. I'm going to make another copy of the website, bring it down here to the bottom, and what I'm going to do is call this, change the label to image path. And I don't want the user to be able to actually, I don't want the user to be able to type in this field, because this path actually will be kind of important to the way that we're doing this. I'm going to open the open file dialog, browse for the picture, and capture that image path, and then we'll use that image path to send the image to the database. So I guess that will be a little more important. So I'm going to reselect that, and I want to change the read-only property to true right here. And now the user will not be able to type in this box. You'll be able to read it, but you won't be able to do anything with that. Okay, so now I am going to find a picture box for our preview. Put our little avatar image preview right over here, and we can grab another one of these labels, copy and paste it, put it right up here on top of that, and I'm just going to change the text property on that to preview. And at this point, when we're seeing this picture, it's not actually been, it hasn't actually been stored to the database. Rather, we are just, looking at it from disk. I'm going to go ahead and put a little picture frame around my picture box here. So if you select your picture box, we can change a few of the properties in here. First thing I'm going to do is change the name to PB for picture box, and then I'm going to call it preview. And I want to put a border around there, so I'm going to find the border style property, and I'm going to set that to fixed single, and that puts a nice little frame around there. And I'm going to change the background so it's not the same color as the rest of our form, and I'm just going to use kind of a light gray, maybe a dark gray property here. Actually, I'm going to lighten it up. I'm going to say silver. It's still pretty dark. It doesn't really matter. It's just what the user sees, but you know that, hey, something's supposed to be in there. So we want to be able to add something. Okay, next up, we're going to need a button, a command button, to open our file browser, or open file dialog as it's called. So I'm going to change the text on that button to browse. And then I'm going to just call it I changed the name because we will be using this to CMD for command button browse. And I think that's everything I need to do here. Actually, do want to change my tab pages as well. To do this, all you got to do is select your tab control up here. Just click it once, and then find the collection here, the tab pages collection in the properties. I'm going to name this tab control too. I'm going to call it TC main. I'm going to find the tab pages collection, click on that, and here you can see the properties for each page in that list. So I'm going to rename these tab pages. The first I'm going to rename, don't confuse the text property with the name. For the text property, I'm just going to set this to add user, since that'll be our add user form. And I want to find the name of that. And I will call it TP for tab page, new user. Okay, that's how we will talk to that tab page if we want to. And for this one, I'm going to change the name to TP view so we can view our images from our database. And I need to find the text property as well. Where did you go? And you could say something like view user. That works pretty well. And then hit OK when you're done. And now you'll have two different tabs. One for a user form and one for our add user. So before we jump into the actual coding here, we got a couple more controls we want to add. The next step being for this tab here, we want to be able to interface with our open file dialog. To do that, first we need an open file dialog. So find your open file dialog. You can drag and drop that on your property. It's just going to drop it down here at the bottom. And what I do is I will select that if it's not already selected and change the name of that to OFD for open file dialog and browse. Okay. And by default, the file name that it puts in there is open file dialog. And what I like to do is set that to, you could either say, if you want to automatically see all files, you could say star.star, and it's just using wildcards. Or if you just want a specific type of file, say a PNG, you could do star.png. And that will automatically display any files in that open file dialog. At least any PNG files in that folder. So we can also change our filter expression here. And to do this is kind of a weird little thing. Say you want to be able to search for different types of files, say BMP files or JPEGs, .jpg files, .pngs. You can set the whole list of files that the user is able to browse for, including all files if you want to do star.star. So you could say all files, and then what you do is you separate the text from the search expression with a bar. So that's the shift and backslash key. Throws in that weird bar there, and then you put in your filter expression. In this case it would be star.star, and that would show all files in the directory. And you again separate each of these with another bar. I hope you can see that over there. So next up we could say, I want PNG files. Add another bar. Do star.png, throw in another. I want JPEG files, and throw in a bar. Do star.jpg, and you could do GIF files or GIF files, however you say it. BMP files, whatever, any kind of image formats that you want there. So that kind of gives you an idea of how to use this crazy filter. It's kind of interesting. Another thing we could set is the initial directory. You know, something you can use environmental variables or direct paths. Like you could use C:\\, and that would take you directly to your C drive when you open the file dialog. Or you could use a system variable like app data if you want to go to, you know, your app data folder, your My Documents, whatever. So doesn't really matter which one you choose, it's up to you. Let's see, what else do I want to do here? I kind of wanted to jump into coding here, but I think I want to finish the user interface first. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump over to the View tab, the View Users. And this is going to be really simple. I'm going to add a combo box for a dynamic query filter, and I will show you how to use that in a bit. I've done this in previous tutorials. It's a kind of a cool effect, and I'm going to make this a read-only dialog box because I'm going to be populating it dynamically from the database using a query, and then you'll be able to requery another table or, you know, really run any other query from that. So let's go ahead and find the drop-down style and change that to drop-down list, and that will make it read-only so the user cannot type into it. So I'm going to stretch that out a little bit, and I'm going to change the name of it to CBX for combo box DB as in database user. Okay, so I'm going to populate this with a list of users that we've added to our database, and then hopefully when we select that user, it will automatically query the avatars table and pull out the image data that we've stored there. That's the objective. So what we are going to need to be able to view that image is another picture box. I'm going to pull that out right there. And there is another property I didn't think about adding, but we probably ought to add it. Go ahead and get that sized up the way you want it. Go ahead and throw on, you know, if you want, throw on the same border style. I like to use the fixed single, and also change the back color. Sorry, getting off on a tangent here. Drop that down. What was I saying? Get myself lost. Going in too many directions here. Oh yeah, the display property here. If we go down to the size mode property, right now it's on normal. So say you stored a large image that was actually larger than this picture box, it would stretch out of view. It would just kind of keep going, and you would just see like the upper left hand corner of the picture. On the other hand, if it was a super small image, you know, say it was only 32 by 32 pixels, it's just going to show down here, or, you know, show up here in the corner at its regular size. So what I want to do is set that to actually, you could set it to center, but I want to use the stretch image property here, and what that will do is no matter what size or shape the image is, it's going to fit it into this box, and that may cause some distortion if your image is not, you know, of the same sort of aspect ratio or size configuration. You know, if it's wider than it is tall, it's gonna squash it in there. Just something to keep in mind, and really you can set that to whatever you like. Again, I'm not, you know, certainly not recommending storing really large images to your database, because that's going to make your database swell up really fast in size, and it may affect performance, especially in a professional environment. It's just really not recommended. If you're using this to capture, say, an e-signature or some other small database, you know, an avatar or a personnel image, you know, something like that for an employee file, it'd be perfect for that. It should work pretty well and operate fairly smoothly. So I'm going to add one more label here. Try to get that lined up, and I'm just going to call this change the text property on that to image from SQL Database. So this is where it's actually going to be displaying out of our database if we do it correctly. So I'm going to be showing you how to add it to the database and read it from the database. Where else are you going to get that in one awesome tutorial? Man, I can't even talk right. I'm tired. All right. I probably want to change that same image layout on this picture box as well. So, where are you? Size mode, stretch image. Okay, it's just going to fit it into the box. I think I got everything right here. Did I rename these? TXT email, TXT website, and what about you, Mr. Image Path? No, I forgot you. Okay. Well, I'm just gonna call you TXT Image Path. Okay. Alrighty. Save your project. Okay, so I have a nice little form here to work with. Now it's time to jump into the form code. If you stuck it out this long, good for you. I hope you're learning something here. First thing we want to do is jump in here. We can either hit select your form and hit F7, or you can double click your form. That will also generate a form load event. Get out of that tab control and double click. Notice how it creates a load event for you there. One thing we could do in this case, in case of my app here, you know, I set that the initial the file path on this to be app data. I have a couple of images that I created for this tutorial. And I'm just going to take those and dump them directly into my project folder just so they're easy to find here. Give me one moment. I want to find you. Let's see. In the bin folder debug. There you guys are. Okay, so what I did, just copying these over real quick, and you can use any images on your computer. You can browse wherever you want. This is only for the tutorial, but they will be included in the tutorial source code if you want them. They're just some simple little pictures I made for the dudes like I showed you earlier. So you can right click on your project in the solution header, open folder in Windows Explorer, and this will actually open your folder. So we can browse to the bin folder and then the debug folder. This is where your application launches from. Okay, while you're in testing your application, the debug folder is basically your application startup path for now. So I'm just going to paste those files in there, and you see what I've done is I've done 2 PNG files, and I wanted to demonstrate this with a JPEG as well, showing that you can upload both of these different picture formats to the database, and they should work. So I'm just dumping them in my project folder here, and rather than grab this whole long string, you can see my whole folder path here. Rather than grab that whole long string, I'm going to go back into my form load event here, and I'm going to set my open file dialog browser directory. I'm going to say ofd browse dot initial directory equals application dot startup path. Okay, and that's going to override that app data setting that I put in right here. When the form loads up, it's going to change its initial startup directory to this. As it stands right now, if you launch your app, click browse, nothing happens. It's kind of just a dead form. So what we want to do is go back to our form and double click the browse button here, CMD browse, and what we'll do is we'll say OFD browse.show dialog. Okay? And when you do that, it will then initiate this, it'll open your browser, your file browser. So now if we hit browse, we can see our guys. And you notice only the PNG files are showing. That's because by default I said, show me my PNG files. Additionally, we can select all files if we want to see everything in that directory, or alternatively, we could look at JPEGs. There's that little guy. So now if I select him, nothing happens. So now we need to add some action to all of these. First thing we'll do, I'm going to stop my app from running. I'm going to go back to my form and find my OFD browse, my open file dialog. I'm going to double click on that to generate this browse file OK event. That means that we selected OK after we chose our file, or we double clicked on our file. Both of these will fire this event here. And when this occurs, I want to do a try catch statement, because we're going to try piping in whatever file we selected into that picture box, our preview, and also set the path to the image. So what we'll do is we'll say picture box preview dot image. We're going to set the image property to be equal to a new image from a file, and we're going to use whatever was selected in the open file dialog. So just going to say OFD browse dot file name. Okay, and that file name is a little misleading. That is actually the entire path of the file, so it's not just the file name. And that should provide our picture box with a path to an image so it can display correctly. Next up, we want to set our text box on our main form, the one that we set for the image path. We're going to set the text property on that to be equal to the open file dialog dot file name. So they're both going to be the same. This one's just going to capture the text of the file name to the path. This one's providing the path to our image preview. Let's go ahead and give that a little test. And I'm not supplying anything in the exception here. I'm just going to, if there's an error for some reason, just don't display it. But don't crash our application. So it just sort of ignores it. So I'm going to hit browse here, and I'm going to select the little guy. All right, look at that. It's showing up beautifully. So that part's working good. Now we need some more, we need to be able to drop some of this information, specify information, drop it into tables in our database, along with this image path. Well, we'll get to that part a little bit later. Trying to do two different things at once. We have two different tables that we want to update. Both the user table and the image table. So let's go ahead and jump back into our code. So we're ready to begin working with our database at this point. To actually be able to communicate with our database, we have to provide an instance of our SQL Control class that we created. So I'm going to create a private SQL as a new SQL Control. All right. So when we call this new, that is going to execute this new sub. And because we're not drawing it with any connection string parameters, it's going to by default grab this one, this blank new sub, and it will in turn use whatever we've supplied here as our database connection. Okay. So we just created a new instance of our SQL class. Now we can begin writing queries to our database. And which one do I want to start with here? How about adding the user information? So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say I'm going to create this as a function because we're going to do this in two parts, and I don't want it to try adding the avatar if the user has not been added successfully. So I'm going to say private function add user, and I want to know if the user was added successfully. So I'm going to say, you know, true or false. I'm going to say as a Boolean. All right. So what we'll do is do just a tiny bit of form validation here. You know, in the real world, you're probably going to need to supply all sorts of validation for your forms. But for now, I'm just going to say, if not, string is null or empty. txt username dot text, meaning that as long as there is some text in there, we're going to try adding it to the database. And also, that means, you know, what's different here is if this doesn't evaluate correctly, then it's just going to bail out of the expression immediately instead of even trying to make the next match. So, and also not string dot is null or empty, txt password dot text. You could also use is null or empty or white space. A couple of different options there. Okay, so if both of these fields, those are our required database fields. If you remember, we set those, you know, not to allow nulls in the database. So those have to be provided. So there has to be something in those fields. If both of those are true, then we'll say create our SQL parameters. Help if I could spell it, a little note. So first thing we do is create our parameters. I'm going to say SQL.addParam. That's calling on that sub that we made down here, if you remember. That's going to pipe it into our parameters list for our query. So SQL.addParam. And the parameters we want to add is one for the username, so I'm going to say @user. That's the name of the parameter as it will be used in our query or command. And next we provide a value for this this parameter. Think of a parameter in SQL as a variable in VB. So this user variable or parameter is going to be the txt username dot text. Okay, and you can actually copy and paste these, save yourself a little bit of typing time. I'm a little bit slow typing when I'm talking, so next one will be our password. We want to change that to our txt password box. And if the user supplied an email and website, and it's okay if those are null in our database, we set that so it's not going to choke if it has some parameters that come back with null values. Otherwise it might throw some errors at you. So txt email dot text. And finally website. txt website was our final text box. Okay, so first thing it's going to do is check to see if these two fields are populated, and then it's just going to go ahead and throw these parameters, whatever values are in those boxes. It's going to prepare for our query or our command. In this case it's going to be an insert command. So here we'll say run insert command. And I will say we're going to call on our exec query sub, execute query, and here we're going to create an insert command in SQL. And to do this, we'll say insert into the table that we want, which is users, and we have to specify the columns that we want to insert. Remember, we do not use the auto incrementing ID column, so make sure not to use that. Username, password, email, website. Okay, so these are the columns I want to add, and now I have to provide some values. I'm going to go ahead and drop this down to the next line by doing an ampersand and an underscore. I like to write my queries on 2 lines so they're more readable. And next up, we have to supply values. And the values we want to add to these columns need to be added in the same order as the columns that we suggested above. The first value we want to enter is our username, so we're going to call the @user parameter. Next up, we will call the @pass parameter, and then the @email parameter, and then @website. Okay. So it's going to grab those parameters like variables and pipe them into these columns, hopefully, if it executes correctly. Okay. So, of course, the first thing we want to do is make sure that this does execute correctly. And to do that, what we can do is use that exception variable that we specified in here to check for any errors. And in the event that we find an error, we'll probably we'll abort the function and return false. So it'll tell our program that it failed, essentially, but it won't crash. It shouldn't. So we'll say on errors, return false. You could also, optionally, you can report the error if you would like to know what that was. Sometimes it is just really nice to know why your query crashed. So we'll say if not string dot is null or empty SQL dot exception, meaning that if any text, really, because as soon as our query begins executing, this string is set to empty. So if that comes back and it's not empty for any reason, that means if this catch in the try catch was fired and this exception has been populated with an error. So in the event that that is true, then this string will not be null or empty, and then we will return false. Okay. Optionally, we could do something like then message box SQL.exception. Tell us why it crashes. And it doesn't like having those on one line. You can use a colon as a separator between these two commands. Okay, it's a nice little VB feature. So if there's a failure for some reason, it will report it to us, and that's optional. You could just take that out and return false if you just want it to be quiet about it. On success, return true. So if all of this runs through, passes with no errors, then the next thing to do is just tell us that it was successful. So return true. All right. And again, now because we did not specify default fallback value for our function, it's still not happy. We have to return something. If for some reason this goes, finishes, if this finishes for any reason whatsoever and passes beyond this return value, something went wrong, so we're just going to return false. And it really shouldn't, but that'll make our function happy if we just tell it something didn't work. And we could probably even break this down a little. I'm sitting here looking at the code thinking, I could probably make this a little better. In fact, I'm just going to do this real quick here. I'm going to change this. I'm going to say If not string is null or empty username, then message box, whoops, not message box, message box, please enter a username. It's going to be a little more intelligent. Say if, and I'm going to take out the not to get rid of this end if, since that's not necessary. I don't need this guy. Message box. Revising your code in the middle of a tutorial. That's great. Please enter a password. And you could also do a return false. Return false. Now, because we just sort of changed the way that this is occurring, you know, we can just cause it to abort immediately instead of trying to do everything else. What we will do, let's see, if not, okay, if the string is not null or empty, okay, so we did sort of change the criteria here. If the string is null or empty, then message box and exit. Okay, that's essentially what we're saying. Yeah, I like that better. And then, if all is well, proceed on. If there are any errors, abort, report, and abort. And then, otherwise, return true. I like the look of that. That's better. Okay. Next up. Now we need a way to actually test this sub and see if it functions properly. One thing I did forget to do here is actually add an upload button. So, or a save button. Either way. Stretch this down just a little bit so I can add a button to it. I'm just going to plop that right down there in the middle. Put the text, change the text to save. And I'm going to call it CMD upload. I guess you could call it CMD save. Double click on that guy. And so let's just try this. We'll say if add user equals false. Remember, we're returning a Boolean value, so if for some reason it failed, then tell us why. Message box failed to add a new user. That should be good enough. And subsequently, in the event of a failure, exit the sub. Proceed no further. Alright, so let's just give that a test. Actually, I'm going to close that real quick. It would be nice to know if we were successful. So I'm going to say message box user added successfully. So if for any reason up here this fails or returns false, it's just going to exit the sub. It's going to report and then exit. And if it exits, if this fails for any reason, this piece of code here will not be executed. So this message box will not pop up because we'll have exited the sub. That's kind of how that little guy works. Otherwise, it will proceed on, meaning that the add user equals true and we were successful. It will tell us. Let's just go ahead and give it a save. Oh, please enter a username, so that's working properly. Failed to add the new user, so we'll try adding Tim. Save. Oh, please enter a password. Failed to add new user. Password. All right. Let's just go ahead and throw in timiscool@gmail.com. That's probably a real Gmail account. I have no idea who it belongs to, and please don't spam them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Surely that's not a real person. HTTP. Oh, let's see. www.timissuperawesome.com. Oh, we exceeded our limit. Oh, it's because we had our 30 character limit. We forgot to change that for these two fields. Not a big deal. Okay, timissupercool.com. That's probably a real website. I'm not going to go there, but let's go ahead and save. User added successfully. Could it be true? Well, let's check it out. Let's bring up our database real quick. And now we haven't added any avatars yet, but if all is well, then we should be able to go to our users table and select the top 1,000 rows. Look at that. Tim was added successfully. There he is. His password is password. Tim is cool. There's his email address, and there's his website. So I like the way that's looking. Now we want to get rid of Tim because we might want to add him again in the future. So I'm just going to edit the top 200 rows here. Select that row and delete. Probably just as fast to write a query, but a command. Alright, so happy day. Our application is working. Now we just need to be able to add images because we want to add Tim to the database. And we want to be able to view them. So this is the part you guys all came for. And you know, half of you probably came from shortcuts in the description, but that's fine. So let's go ahead and get into building our command for inserting an image into the database. All right. Let's go ahead and come down here. And I'm going to create a new private sub. I'm going to call it upload image. And we need to supply the image path to be uploaded to our database. And this is going to come from our open file dialog, or actually from that text box probably. So say path as a string. And if the user, if for some reason the user did not specify an image, we need to be able to abort this mission. So we're just going to say exit if image not selected. Okay. So we'll say if for some reason the string is null or empty, and that's the path. No path was supplied or the text box was clear, then exit the sub. Go no further. Alright. I always like those little abort the mission. Okay, so next up we need to get the image data via a memory stream. This is where it gets exciting. Okay, now to be able to use our streams, use the system's file stream, it's nice to have a reference to the system.io namespace. So I want to go up above our class here and say imports system.io. It's not a requirement, just shortens your code later on. Instead of having to call the entire namespace every time you want to stream, you can just call the memory stream. So what we need to do is provide an image first off to create a stream from. So I'm going to say dim img as image, and this will be a new image from file path, similar to the way we did it before. And once we have that image in memory in this variable, we can then create a memory stream to harvest the bytes. We want to get the raw data out of this image. Scrape that binary out and stuff it in the table, in our database table. So we're going to create a new memory stream. I'm just going to call this ms as a new memory stream. And then I'm going to save the image to that memory stream. So it's just going to, in its raw format, it's going to save the bytes to the memory stream. So I'm going to say image.save memory stream. I'm going to call that. And then the image format is I just want the raw format. So I'm going to say image.raw format. Okay. So now it's sitting there in the memory stream. Now I want to copy that memory stream into a buffer, or just a storage container for all of these bytes of data. So I'm going to create a buffer. Just going to name it buffer as an array of byte. Okay. So we just created an array of bytes, and we're going to fill it up from the memory stream. Get buffer, memory stream.get buffer. Okay, I don't know if the parentheses are necessary on those or not. I should probably look that up. So that is essentially how we harvest our data from our image. And now that we have that data, we can pass that directly into a SQL parameter and pipe it into our database. So now I'll say add SQL parameters. Man, I always miss that E. And first one will be add parameter. Now, we don't just want to dump the image data into the database. We want to be able to associate it with a user. So we want to capture the username first. And this will be used to essentially associate when we want to run queries against our database. We want the image for Tim. We want to be able to specify that. So we're going to say @user. And the user I want to grab is whoever's in the txt username .text. Okay. First parameter. Second parameter. This parameter is going to contain all of the information from our image. So that buffer full of bytes, that binary data from the image, is what we're going to pipe into the database. So I'm going to say @image. And just keep in mind, these parameters can be named anything you want. You could call it images if you want it. It doesn't matter. It's just a variable name. And the value that we want to push through here, whoops, SQL params. What am I doing? Talking and not thinking. I want to add a parameter, and the data that I want to pipe into the image will be our buffer. And I did something wrong here. Okay, you know what it is. Value of type one-dimensional array of byte cannot be converted to a string. See, I think what I did was accidentally set value. Okay, value should not just be a string. That means we're limited to sticking string values in our database when the data type we're trying to enter is, binary, sort of a binary object. So what we want to do is use something that's more nebulous than a string, something to capture any data type in VB. So let's jump back to our SQL Control class here. And I think my error was right here. This should have been an object. Okay, instead of value as a string, value is object, because object can really be any kind of data type pretty much. So that way we can just pass anything in there, whether it's a string or an array. A one-dimensional array of bytes is why it was complaining there. So where was that? Yeah, see, it's happy now. Sorry about that little mistake. All right. Let us continue down here. And so if you recall from earlier, the next thing we want to do is actually execute our command. So say run insert command, and we'll say SQL dot execute query. Once again, we're going to use an insert command, but this time instead of inserting into the users table, we will insert into our avatars table. So I'm going to say insert into avatars, and we have to specify our columns. So the columns I want to insert, again, never the ID, the auto incrementing ID. So I want to insert the username and the avatar. And if you remember, that avatar is an image data type in our database. And the values we want to put in there. Whoops, kind of breaking my own rule. I like to drop that down for readability. And another thing I've seen a lot of people, a little error that a lot of people make is not providing spaces between their one value and the next, and it'll cause some run-on statements. You got to be careful. I usually put a space at the end of my lines like that. Otherwise you can run into some weird errors, especially in query filters and things like that. So something to keep in mind. Values we want to add are the username @user and @avatar. All right. And wow, I'm getting tired. Sorry about that. Okay. Yep. Got to make sure your variables or your parameter names line up. Okay. Avatar is the image. Username is @user. And then we will report errors if they occur. Report errors. And remember how to do this. Say if not string dot is null or empty, SQL dot exception, then message box SQL dot exception. Good enough. All right, so now we need to utilize this upload image, and the place that we will do this is going to be in our CMD upload button, this guy right here. So if you click that, it'll actually take you back there, or you can just find your CMD upload.click event. And we want to leave this first line. If it fails for any reason to add a new user, let us know and exit the sub, please. Okay. Otherwise, continue on. So we can say if not string dot is null or empty, txt image path. I think we actually checked for that before, didn't we? Yeah, just gonna make sure. Then upload image. Yeah, I think we specified that earlier on the upload image path. If string is null or empty path. Yeah. So we actually should not have to do that. I'm just going to say upload image, txt image path dot text. Of course, if we wanted it to it's going to say the user was added successfully. You could actually add that, if not string is null or empty, and check this image path. If it is empty, then abort the mission. Otherwise, add this. I'm just going to go ahead and leave it like this to test. That's up to you. So we can attempt to do this. Going to go ahead and press play. Bring this in here, and I'm going to attempt to re-add Tim, and I'm not going to bother adding all this silly information. I just want to see if my image will upload. Okay, so let's go ahead and hit save. User added successfully. Alright, let's go back and look at our database again. That thing is still spooling there. I'm not sure what it's doing. So select top 1,000 rows. Tim, hello world, password. Hey, that worked. Okay, so now we want to know, did my avatar, did my image information go into the database properly? So I'm going to select top 1,000 rows from avatars. And awesome. So the username is Tim. That added successfully to the username field. And as you can see, my image data is in there, and this is what your raw byte data looks like. And you start thinking about that, compare it to standard database records. Here's a standard database record, pretty tiny data, and you're adding this gigantic chunk. Now imagine if you're adding an image. This is just a 32 pixel image, pretty small. Imagine if you're trying to add some big images to your database, how fast your database is going to swell in size. So just keep that in mind when you're using this feature. I highly recommend just storing an image path to disk, maybe in a network location. Just store the path to your image and draw it from there. A lot better in terms of performance, but in the event that you actually do need to upload images into your database, this is it. Okay, so this is all the byte information. Now we want to try to pull this information back out in a format that is meaningful to us, specifically as an image. So I'm going to go ahead and leave Tim in there for now. I'm going to bring that back down, and let's go ahead and work on that second form, or that second tab. We want to generate a dynamic query in here, so I'm going to create a query to load this up with any users that are in our database. So that'll be our next step. So what I'm going to do is create a load users sub, private sub load users CBX. Okay, so you could make it so you can load, you could load a query, any kind of query, into any combo box, pretty much like this. So you say, what combo box do you want to load up with your query? Let's call it CBX as a combo box, and pass that into the parameter. And it's going to say load DB users combo box. This is going to be a very simple query with no parameters. So we're just going to say SQL.execute query, select username from users. Piece of cake. And of course we want to report and abort on errors, so we'll say if not string dot is null or empty. SQL dot exception. Then message box. I want to know what our failure was. SQL exception. Why did you fail to query for some strange reason? And then exit the sub. Proceed no further. If all is well, we do want to proceed. So next up we will create a dynamic user query in the combo box. So I'm going to say create a dynamic user query in combo box. And what we'll do is we will loop through our data rows in our table and add those any records that were found in our data set, specifically the usernames, into our combo box. So I'll say for each R as data row in SQL dot database dataset. I'm actually querying the dataset directly here. Dot tables, and I want the first table in my dataset, and there should really only be one table ever. And I want to collect the rows. Okay, so I'm looking through this collection of rows that are returned to my data set. In the event that there is an error, no tables will be returned, and this would actually cause our application to crash when we tried to execute this. Looking for table 0 where there are no tables, it's going to throw an error. But because we are exiting the sub here, it's going to bypass this code here in the event of an error, and that error will never be thrown in the first place. So we're just looping through each row that is returned, each username that is found in here. And every time one is found, we want to add it to the combo box specified in the parameters. So I'm going to say cbx.items.add, and I want to return R, and I want the first column in R. There should only be one column, so that'll just be 0, and I want to return that as a string to my combo box. And that's all there is to it. So now we're able to load up those users. Now we just need a time to actually call that. So what I will do is use my tab pages enter event, specifically on this tab, to load up that user. So as soon as you click on this tab, it will execute the first query that will fill up this combo box. So let's go ahead and jump back into here, and what we want to do is find the events for our tab pages. So come up here, find TP view is the name of that tab, and we want to look for the enter event over here, and once we select that, it will generate the event for us. And all we have to do is call our load users, cbx. And the combo box that we want to fill up is combo box db user. Let's go ahead and give that a try. It should execute the moment I enter this tab. So if it worked, when I click the drop down, I should see Tim. Yay! Okay. So there's our dynamic query. Now we're going to use Tim as a filter to query the avatars table and find his image data. Okay. So to do this, we're going to need another sub to draw the avatar. But we also need to we need to fetch that avatar image data. So this is where it kind of gets interesting. We're going to need to create a function to fetch all of that byte data from the database table. So to do this, I'm going to create a private function, and I'm going to call it fetch avatar. And the avatar that I want to fetch is going to be specified by the username. So I'm going to say user as string. Okay? And what I want to return in this function is an array of bytes. Remember that buffer that we pushed into our table? We need to pull that back out. So I'm going to make sure you put your parentheses on the end there because it's a byte array. So we're going to query database for image bytes. Okay, oops. Wow, can't type. Alright, so we're going to create a simple query here to our database using a single parameter for the username that's specified above. So I'm going to say SQL.addParam. I'm going to use my good old @user. And the value that I want to use for my query is the username. So I'm going to pull, actually I don't want to, I want to use whatever was selected. No, I do want to use the user. What am I thinking? Okay. And here we will execute our query. We'll say SQL.execute query. And I want to select avatar, specifically the image data from my avatars table, where the username equals @user. Okay. So we only want the image data for this one user. And naturally we want to abort on errors or no image data found. Okay, so if we looked for an image, did not find an image, just bail out. Okay, so we'll just say, oops. If not, string.is null or empty, SQL exception, or else SQL.record count is less than 1, then return nothing. Return a null value. Otherwise, we want to fill and return our image data buffer. Data buffer. Alright, there we go. Dim buffer as our array of bytes. So we'll say as byte with parentheses equals SQL dot DB DS, that's our data set, dot tables 0 dot rows, and we only want to return a single value. In the event that for some reason more than one avatar or image record was returned, which you may program yours in such a way that you return a whole list of images for a single user. That would be fine, but in this case I only want to return a single row, so I'm going to specify the row that I want, and that is row 0. That is the first row in my table, and the field that I want from that table I'm going to specify in another set of parentheses here, and that will be the avatar. Okay, that's the name of the column that we're returning per our select statement. Okay, So grab the first table and the first row in that table and the avatar column and dump it into this buffer variable. And then return that buffer. See, because we're returning an array of bytes. That buffer is an array of bytes. So good stuff. All right. Now that we have a function to fetch that image data, we need the sub to call that function, and that will be done dynamically through our combo box query. So what we want to do is find our combo box and double click on that, and that will generate a select index change event. That means that the user clicked the combo box and actually selected an item in it. So if the user selects an item in there, we want to draw users avatar to specified picture box. And I think I just got ahead of myself. Still missing one very important thing. I skipped a little. I forgot we actually need the sub to call this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a private sub. This is why I should not do tutorials late at night. Draw avatar. And we want to specify a picture box to draw to, and this could be any picture box. So you could actually draw to multiple picture boxes if you want, just by their names. So PB as picture box. All right. So first off, we need to get the image data that we harvested earlier from our database. And what we're going to do is we're going to say dim buffer as an array of bytes. And we're going to set that to be equal to, and here is where we will call our fetch avatar function. Remember, that returns that array of bytes. So if it fails, it's going to return just a null value or nothing, and it shouldn't really care because we're going to tell it not to care. So we're going to say fetch avatar, and the user that I want to fetch is cbx user.text. So whatever username is found in that text combo box is it's going to fetch that user's avatar from the database. Next up, we need to stream the image data into the picture box similar to the way that we picked it up and put it in the database in the first place. So stream image data to picture box. So we're going to say if buffer is not nothing, meaning no error, meaning that no errors were returned or no null value was returned from the fetch avatar, then using the memory stream as a new, using MS as a new memory stream, and we need to, what am I doing? Memory stream, thank you. Okay. And the memory stream is going to be from the buffer, and the offset will be 0. We want to start at the beginning, and we want to run the memory stream to the buffer's full length. So let's say buffer.length. So that picks up all the bytes from the beginning to the end. Then, while it's using that memory stream, we're going to say ms.write the buffer, again, starting at 0 and going to the buffer length. Okay, so that's writing it to the memory, and then we're going to take our picture box dot image, and we're going to extract that image data, that buffer data, right out of the memory stream. And I'm going to show you how to do that. Say image dot from stream. Remember, before we used from file. This time we're sucking it right out of memory. And we specify the memory stream and use embedded color management, set that to true. Okay, and then we should be able to call our draw avatar, and the picture box that we want to draw to is did we forget to name that second one? I think we did. I want to name you, yeah, picture box 1, sorry about that. Picture box 1 PBDB avatar. Picture box database avatar. Okay. PBDB avatar. Okay, so that's, we're gonna draw the avatar to this picture box, and when we execute that, it's going to harvest the image data from this fetch avatar function, which queries the database, grabs the avatar information, pulls it back, then pipes it into the picture box, hopefully. Let's go ahead and give that a run. Let's see if Tim is still in there. Look at that, pulled it right out of the database. It's exactly what we were hoping for. So the data was reassembled properly. So let's add another one. Lexi. Lexi is cool. Okay, email address. Not gonna bother with that. We've all seen that work. So browse. I'm going to find you, and I'm going to save. User added successfully. I like to hear that. Hopefully, when we click this, remember it's going to execute our tab page enter event. And if we click this, now we notice we got 2 Tims because we reloaded that box. What we may want to do is clear the combo box prior to reloading the users. So that's easy to do. We'll figure out a place to stick that. Should be able to look at Lexi, and there's her avatar. Awesome. So let's fix that little bug that we have there. Let's see. When we click the TP view, it's going to load users CBX. So I think what I'll do is just come up here to the load users. I'll say clear combo box. To refresh it. And to do this, we'll just call cbx.items.clear. Let's see if that works. We should be able to click back and forth on this, hopefully. Look at that. Reran it. Not getting any weirdness. Let's go ahead and add Alex. Password, something. We're going to browse for Alex. Oh, Alex isn't it? Oh yeah, we want a JPEG this time because Alex is a JPEG. He doesn't have any fancy alphas. There we go. Save him. User added successfully. View, and notice no more duplications because our combo box is being flushed out each time we enter. Should be able to select Alex. Good. Should be able to select Lexi. Good. Should be able to select Tim. Good. So I guess that concludes this tutorial. We are successfully inserting records into our database. If you wanted, you could have a full user management where you could add, edit, delete users using pretty much exactly the same principles. And you could delete if you delete one, you want to delete them both. If you don't have any database triggers, a lot of professional databases would have database triggers where you delete from a parent table and then the child record in another table is also deleted at the same time. But that's all database design goodies that you kind of need to learn. But there's a number of ways to handle that. It's easy to handle in VB as well, similar to the way that we added a user record, and if that was successful, then added the image record to the other table. Anyway, that concludes this tutorial. I hope it's been helpful for you. I'm sorry if I rambled a lot. I was kind of sleepy tonight, but I hope if you found this useful and helpful, then give me a thumbs up and share it with anybody else that you think would find it helpful as well. I appreciate you guys watching and supporting this channel so much. You're all awesome. And let me know if you have any questions. I try to help out as much as I can. I can't answer all of them all the time, but I do my best. I wish you all good luck on your projects. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.